The emergency alarm echoed through the halls of Harmonies. Watch station with a sound that made every alien on board freeze in terror. Communications Officer ZXI's 6 arms moved across his control panel with desperate speed as static filled. His headset, his large black eyes widened as fragments of a transmission came through the interference. This is Kepler Mining Colony 7. Under attack. Unknown HOS tile ES. Dozens dead. The voice cut out for several seconds before returning weaker than before. Population dropping fast. They're harvesting us. Please send help. Anyone. Before it's too late. ZXI's breathing holes fluttered with panic as he tried to boost the signal strength. The transmission was coming from the edge of Council space, nearly 3 weeks away by their fastest ships. He had never heard such terror in a voice before, and the words harvesting us made his skin change color with fear. Station Commander Veltara arrived within minutes, her tall blue form moving with urgent grace. She was one of the few Council members who had lived through the machine wars 50 years ago, and the word harvesting brought back memories she had tried to forget. How many survivors? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Colony records show 50,000 inhabitants, Commander. The transmission suggests significant losses. ZXI could not bring himself to say that most were likely already dead or worse. Vel single quotes Terra studied the tactical display showing the colony's location. It was a mining world rich in rare minerals, established only 5 years ago by a consortium of different species. The colonists were mostly peaceful traders and miners, completely unprepared for military action. Options? She asked her tactical officer. The 7th Peacekeeping Fleet is our closest response unit, but they are 21 days away at maximum speed. The 2nd Fleet could reach them in 18 days, but they are currently engaged in the Proxima Sector disputes. Veltara felt her heart sink. 21 days was far too long. Whatever was attacking the colony would have completed its work long before help could arrive. She had seen the aftermath of harvesting operations before, entire worlds stripped of all organic matter, leaving only lifeless rock behind. The tactical officer hesitated before speaking again. There is one other option, Commander. Speak. Protocol Omega-7, the Emergency Defense Clause. The bridge fell silent. Every officer present knew what Protocol Omega-7 meant, and none of them wanted to be the first to say it out loud. It was the Council's final option when facing extinction-level threats, a protocol that had never been used in the 50 years since its creation. You're suggesting we contact the humans, Veltara said quietly. The words seemed to hang in the air like a dangerous gas. Humans were members of the Galactic Council, but they were kept at arm's length by most species. They came from a death world called Terra, a planet so violent and dangerous that it had forged them into something the galaxy had never seen before. They were warriors by nature, aggressive and unpredictable, with a military doctrine that other species found disturbing. The human homeworld is only 4 days away from Kepler Colony 7, the tactical officer continued. Their response time would be faster than any Council fleet. Veltara had met humans before during diplomatic functions. They seemed pleasant enough in person, but their reputation preceded them. Stories of human military actions were passed around Council chambers. In whispers, they fought wars with a ferocity that frightened even the most experienced Council generals. They used tactics that seemed insane to other species, throwing themselves into battles that should have been impossible to win. Commander, we're receiving. Another transmission, ZXI called out. The new signal was even weaker than the first, filled with more static and fear. A different voice came through, younger and more desperate. Day 3 of the attack. They're in the underground sections now. The things are machines. They eat everything. They're making more of themselves from our people. Oh gods. They're through the blast doors. Someone please. The transmission ended in screams and the sound of metal tearing through flesh. The bridge crew stood in horrified silence. Knowing they had just listened to someone die, Veltara closed her eyes and made the decision that would change everything. Open a priority channel to the Terran Defense Command. Commander, are you certain? The Council will need to vote on this decision. Protocol Omega-7 requires— There's no time for votes, Veltara interrupted. Those people are dying right now while we follow procedures. I'll take full responsibility. The communications array turned toward the human homeworld as HFY worked to establish a connection. It took several minutes to reach the human command structure, and when the connection was established, the face that appeared on their screen was unlike anything most of the bridge crew had seen before. Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Defense Command looked tired, as if she had been working long hours, but her eyes were sharp and alert. Behind her, the human command center bustled with activity. Humans moved with quick efficiency, their voices creating a constant background hum of coordination and purpose. This is Admiral Chun. I understand you have an emergency situation. Veltara found herself studying the human's face. Chun appeared to be middle-aged by human standards, with graying hair pulled back severely and lines around her eyes that spoke of many difficult decisions. There was something in her expression that reminded Veltara of veteran military officers from her own species, but with an intensity that was purely human. Admiral, we have a colony under attack by unknown hostile forces. Our estimates suggest it's a harvesting operation. The colony has approximately 50,000 inhabitants, and we have no forces capable of reaching them in time. Chun's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Harvesting operation? Machine intelligence? We believe so, based on the transmissions we've received. How long do you estimate the colonists have? Perhaps days, maybe hours. Chun turned away from the screen and spoke to someone off camera, in the rapid, clipped language humans use during emergencies. Veltara caught words like fleet deployment and maximum speed before Chun turned back to them. We'll handle it, Chun said simply. Send us all available data on the colony's location and defensive capabilities. Admiral, I must warn you that our intelligence suggests this is a significant threat. The attacking force appears to be substantial. For the first time, Chun smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Veltara understand why other species feared humans. It wasn't cruel or savage, it was the smile of someone who had been looking for an excuse to do what they did best. Commander, significant threats are what we're for, Chun said. Consider the problem solved. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge crew of Harmony's watch staring at a blank screen. They had just called in the most feared military force in the galaxy to save a colony of peaceful miners and traders. Veltara wondered if they had just made a terrible mistake, but the memory of those screams from the colony convinced her they had made the only choice possible. In the depths of space, the human war machine was already beginning to move. Admiral Sarah Chun stood before the holographic display in the Terran Defense Command Center, watching as red tactical markers updated in real time across the three-dimensional map. The data from the Galactic Council painted a grim picture of Kepler Colony 7, and every minute of delay meant more innocent lives lost. Status report, she called out to her staff. Commander Martinez stepped forward, his tablet showing the latest intelligence updates. The colony is under assault by what appears to be a Veltar swarm, Admiral. Reconnaissance drones confirm machine intelligences with self-replication capabilities. They're using harvested organic matter as raw material for expansion. Chun's jaw tightened. She had read the classified reports about the Veltar from the Machine Wars. They were one of the few threats that had managed to completely consume entire star systems before being stopped. The fact that they had returned after 50 years of silence was deeply troubling. Survivors? Unknown, but the colony's emergency shelters were designed to hold the full population for up to 2 weeks. It's been 4 days since the attack began. Fleet availability? Admiral Chun already knew the answer, but she needed her staff to understand the scope of what she was about to order. The 3rd Expeditionary Fleet was humanity's rapid response force, designed for exactly this type of crisis. Most Council species would send a single heavy cruiser or perhaps a small task force to handle a colony rescue mission. 3rd Fleet is at full strength and ready for deployment. 12 dreadnoughts, 43 cruisers, 67 destroyers, 112 support vessels. and the full Marine Expeditionary Force. Total personnel count is approximately 300,000 across all vessels. The number hung in the air like a declaration of war. Other species measured their military responses carefully, sending precisely what was needed and no more. Humans had a different philosophy. They believed in overwhelming force applied quickly and decisively. Deployment time? 18 hours for full fleet deployment, Admiral. We can have the advance elements moving in 12 hours if we push the prep schedule. Chun studied the tactical display again, considering her options. The Council expected her to send a rescue mission, probably a few ships with some Marines to evacuate survivors. Instead, she was about to deploy enough firepower to level a small moon. Deploy the full Third Fleet. I want those people off that rock, and I want the Veltar swarm completely eliminated. The command center erupted into controlled chaos as officers began implementing the deployment order. Communications specialists established secure channels with fleet commanders throughout the Sol system, while logistics coordinators began the massive task of preparing hundreds of ships for immediate departure. Captain Rodriguez, Chun's senior aide, approached with a concerned expression. Admiral, the Council's request specified a rescue mission. Are you sure we need the full fleet for an evacuation? Chun turned to face him, and her expression was harder than the steel hulls of the ships she was deploying. Captain, the Veltar don't just kill people. They process them into raw materials for building more machines. Every minute we spend discussing proper response levels is another minute those colonists spend listening to their friends and families being turned into spare parts. She gestured to the holographic display showing the colony's location. The last time the galaxy faced the Veltar, it took a combined council fleet of over 1,000 ships 3 years to stop them. By then, they had consumed 7 inhabited worlds and billions of lives. I'm not going to let that happen again because we were worried about seeming too aggressive. The fleet began moving within the hour. Massive dreadnoughts powered up their fusion drives and pulled away from Earth's orbital shipyards, followed by streams of smaller vessels in perfect formation. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying. 300 ships moving with the precision of a single organism, their hulls gleaming in the sunlight. As they accelerated toward the outer system's jump points, Admiral Chun transferred her command to the flagship Indomitable, a kilometer-long dreadnought that served as the fleet's nerve center. As they reached jump velocity, she stood on the bridge watching the stars shift into the familiar patterns of faster-than-light travel. Time to target? She asked her navigation officer. 4 days, 17 hours at current speed, Admiral. We're pushing the drives harder than recommended, but they'll hold. 4 days to reach people who might not have 4 hours left. Chun had made this type of calculation before, weighing the risks of aggressive tactics against the certainty of death for those they were trying to save. She had never lost sleep over choosing speed and violence over caution and procedure. During the transit, reconnaissance drones launched ahead of the fleet began sending back detailed intelligence on the situation at Kepler Colony 7. The images were worse than Chun had expected. The Veltar had established processing facilities across the colony's surface, massive mechanical structures that were systematically breaking down everything organic they could find. Population assessment? Chun asked as she reviewed the latest drone footage. Difficult to determine, Admiral. The surface installations show significant Veltar expansion, suggesting they've had access to substantial organic matter. However, thermal imaging shows heat signatures consistent with large groups of survivors in the underground emergency shelters. Chun studied the tactical displays, noting the locations of the Veltar processing centers and the defensive positions they had established. The machines had turned the colony's own infrastructure against its inhabitants, using mining equipment and industrial facilities as weapons and fortifications. Marine deployment options? Colonel Harris, commander of the Marine Expeditionary Force, stepped forward with his tactical assessment. The underground shelters are accessible through multiple entry points, but the Veltar have established overlapping fields of fire covering most approaches. Standard doctrine would suggest orbital bombardment followed by ground assault, but that risks collapsing the tunnel systems and trapping the survivors. Chun nodded, appreciating the complexity of the situation. A typical council rescue mission would involve careful negotiation, limited engagement rules, and weeks of planning to minimize casualties on both sides. Human doctrine was simpler but required perfect execution, hit the enemy so hard and so fast that they couldn't respond effectively. What do you need for a simultaneous extraction and elimination mission? Harris smiled with the same dangerous expression Chun had shown the council representatives. Give me orbital fire support for the surface installations and drop pod insertion. For the underground areas, the Veltar won't know what hit them. Time frame? 6 hours from arrival to complete elimination of hostile forces and full evacuation of survivors. The Veltar won't have time to adapt to our tactics. Chun approved the plan, knowing that other species would consider it insanely aggressive. Human Marines were trained for exactly this type of operation, rapid insertion into hostile territory. With overwhelming force and clear objectives, they would go into those tunnels and emerge with every living colonist, or they wouldn't emerge at all. As the Third Fleet raced toward Kepler Colony 7, Shane reflected on the differences between human and council military doctrine. Other species fought wars with careful consideration, precise application of force, and complex rules of engagement. Humans fought wars with the understanding that the fastest way to peace was through the complete destruction of their enemies. Ability to cause harm, the council had called them for help, and they would receive exactly what they had asked for: the full attention of humanity's war machine, focused on a single objective. The Veltar swarm was about to discover why every species in the galaxy feared the mention of human military intervention. In 18 hours, the Third Fleet would arrive at Kepler Colony 7, and the real test would begin. The Third Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler system like a storm front emerging from the void. 300 human warships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls dark against the starfield as they began their approach toward the besieged colony world. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the tactical displays update as her ships spread into attack formation. The sight before them would have been impressive to most species. A Veltar swarm, in full harvest mode, covered the colony's surface with mechanical structures that gleamed like metal cancer in the system's pale sunlight. Fleet deployment complete. Admiral, reported Captain Singh from the tactical station. All ships are in position and awaiting orders. Chun studied the enemy formations with professional interest. The Veltar had established defensive perimeters around their processing facilities, using captured colony equipment to create overlapping fields of fire. Swarm units moved in coordinated patterns between the installations, their mechanical forms, designed for efficiency rather than individual survival. Open a channel to the swarm, Chun ordered. Her communications officer looked confused. Admiral, the Veltar don't typically respond to diplomatic contact. I'm not being diplomatic. The channel opened, broadcasting on all frequencies toward the colony world. Chane's voice carried the authority of someone who had never been denied when she made a demand. Veltar swarm. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Third Fleet. You have 60 seconds to cease all hostile operations and withdraw from this system. This is your only warning. The response came immediately, not in words but in action. Swarm units across the colony's surface turned toward the sky as launch tubes emerged from their mechanical bodies. Hundreds of interceptor craft burst from the surface installations, their insectoid forms accelerating toward the human fleet with mechanical precision. Incoming hostiles, Singh reported. Count is approximately 800 units and climbing. They're launching everything they have? Chun watched the approaching swarm with the same expression she might use to observe an interesting weather pattern. Around her, the bridge crew prepared for combat with calm efficiency. This was what they had trained for, the moment when human military doctrine would be tested against an enemy that knew no fear and accepted no surrender. Signal the fleet. All ships are weapons-free. Eliminate all hostile contacts. The Third Fleet opened fire as one, and the space around Kepler Colony 7 filled with death. Particle beams and kinetic rounds reached across the void with devastating accuracy, turning the approaching swarm interceptors into expanding clouds of superheated debris. Human point defense systems created walls of destruction that no enemy craft could penetrate. The swarm's opening assault, designed to overwhelm defenders through sheer numbers, lasted exactly 43 seconds. When the firing stopped, empty space surrounded the human fleet, and the colony's orbital area was filled with the cooling remains of 837 swarm units. Surface installations are powering up additional launch systems. Singh reported, "They're preparing a second wave." "Negative," Chun said calmly. "Begin orbital bombardment. Target all surface installations. I want those processing facilities reduced to scrap metal." The fleet's main guns turned toward the colony world, and space filled with the thunder of human firepower. Kinetic rounds accelerated to significant fractions of light speed hammered into the swarm installations, while particle beams carved through their defensive positions with surgical precision. The mechanical structures that had taken the swarm days to build disappeared in minutes under the concentrated fire of 12 dreadnoughts from the underground shelters. The surviving colonists felt the world shake as the human fleet methodically destroyed everything the swarm had built on the surface. Emergency lights flickered in the tunnels as massive explosions echoed through the rock above them. Dr. Yanai, the colony's chief medical officer, pressed herself against the shelters. Reinforced walls as another shockwave rattled the underground complex. Her forearms wrapped around a group of terrified younglings from various species, trying to provide comfort in a situation that offered none. "What's happening up there?" whispered Trader Kellogg's, his normally green skin pale with fear. "I don't know," Yanai replied, though she had hope for the first time in days. The sounds of combat above were different from the mechanical precision of the swarm's attacks. This was chaos, but it was organized chaos, the kind that suggested someone was fighting back against their tormentors on the surface. The Veltar swarm attempted to adapt to the human assault with typical machine intelligence efficiency. They reconfigured their remaining units for anti-orbital combat and established new defensive positions using the colony's hardened industrial structures. It was a logical response that would have worked against most enemies. The humans were not most enemies. "Swarm units are repositioning for continued resistance," Singh reported. "They're using the colony infrastructure as defensive positions?" "Then we go in and dig them out," Chun replied. "Launch all drop pods, execute marine insertion protocol." The Third Fleet's assault transports opened their launch bays, and the first wave of human marines shot toward the colony surface in armored drop pods. Each pod was a miniature fortress designed to punch through enemy defenses and deliver its occupants directly into combat. The sight of 3,000 drop pods streaking through the atmosphere was something no living being had ever witnessed before. Colonel Harris rode in the lead pod, monitoring the tactical situation as his Marines prepared for ground combat. The Veltar had controlled the colony's surface for nearly a week, giving them time to establish strong defensive positions. In human military doctrine, that meant they had become predictable. "All units, remember the mission parameters," Harris broadcast to his Marines. "The colonists are in underground shelters throughout the complex. Every civilian we save is worth more than every machine we destroy. Watch your fire zones and mind the structural integrity of the tunnel systems." The drop pods hit the colony surface like meteorites, their armored shells designed to punch through almost any material. Marines emerged from their pods already firing, their weapon systems coordinated with orbital targeting data to maximize the destruction of swarm units while minimizing damage to the colony infrastructure. What followed was unlike anything the Veltar had experienced in their previous encounters with organic life. Human Marines didn't retreat when faced with superior numbers. They advanced with weapons that turned individual swarm units into scrap metal. They didn't panic when surrounded. They coordinated with orbital fire support to eliminate entire swarm formations. The machines attempted to adapt to human tactics, but adaptation required time, and humans didn't fight wars that lasted long enough for enemies to learn. Within the first hour of ground combat, Marine units had fought their way to the first underground shelter and established contact with the survivors. "Admiral, we have contact with colonial survivors," Harris reported from the surface. Initial count suggests significant numbers of living civilians in the underground complexes, beginning evacuation procedures. Chen watched the tactical displays as her Marines spread throughout the colony complex. Their movements coordinated with orbital fire support to systematically eliminate every swarm unit they encountered. The Veltar had expected to face panic and disorganization from organic defenders. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to thrive on the chaos of combat. Status on swarm elimination? 70% of identified targets destroyed, Singh reported. Remaining units are attempting to establish new defensive positions in the deeper industrial sections. Time to complete elimination? At current pace, approximately 4 hours for surface operations. Underground clearing will take longer due to civilian presence. Chun nodded, satisfied with the progress. In 4 hours, the Third Fleet had gone from arrival to near-complete elimination of a swarm infestation that had threatened to consume an entire star system. The colonists would be saved, the Veltar would be destroyed, and the galaxy would once again see why humans were both feared and respected as the most effective military force in known space. The real work was just beginning. The underground tunnels of Kepler Colony 7 had become a maze of terror over the past week, but now they echoed with a different sound, the methodical advance of human Marines. Clearing every passage with ruthless efficiency, Sergeant Rodriguez led her squad through the maintenance tunnels, their tactical lights cutting through darkness that had hidden swarm units for days. "Motion sensors show 3 contacts ahead," whispered Corporal Kim, his scanner painting targets on their shared tactical display. "Standard swarm configuration? 2 harvesters and 1 constructor unit?" Rodriguez studied the tunnel layout through her helmet display, noting the structural supports and power conduits that ran along the walls. The swarm units had taken position at a junction where they could control access to the civilian shelters, beyond exactly where human doctrine suggested they would be. "Shun, Park, flank left through the utility crawlway," she ordered. "Kim, Williams, overwatch position here. I'll take point through the main tunnel. On my mark." The attack lasted 8 seconds. Rodriguez's plasma rifle turned the first harvester into molten metal before it could react, while her flanking Marines eliminated the constructor unit with coordinated fire. The remaining harvester attempted to retreat toward the civilian shelters, but Kim's precision shot from Overwatch dropped it before it could move 10 meters. "Clear," Rodriguez reported to her squad. Proceeding to Shelter Complex 7. This same scene played out hundreds of times throughout the colony's underground network, as human Marines systematically eliminated every swarm unit they encountered. The machines had adapted their tactics for fighting in confined spaces, using the tunnel's narrow passages to limit their enemy's ability to maneuver. Against most organic forces, this would have been effective. Against humans, it was suicide. Marines moved through the tunnels like they owned them, using equipment designed specifically for close-quarters combat in hostile environments. They knew exactly where every swarm unit was hiding because their orbital support had mapped the entire complex with deep penetration sensors. Dr. Yanai heard the sounds of combat approaching their shelter and pulled the younglings closer to the reinforced walls. The fighting had been getting closer for hours, and she could hear weapons fire that sounded different from the swarm's energy weapons, sharper, more aggressive, with the distinctive whine of high-energy particle beams. "Doctor, something's happening," called Trader Kellogg's from near the shelter's main entrance. "The door sensors are showing movement outside." The massive blast doors that protected Shelter 7 had been sealed for 6 days, their emergency locks preventing anything from entering or leaving. The colonists inside had listened to their friends die in the tunnels beyond, powerless to help as the swarm methodically processed every living thing they could find. Heavy impacts echoed against the door, followed by a sound none of them recognized. human voices speaking in rapid, clipped sentences that carried the authority of military professionals. "Occupied shelter confirmed," came a muffled voice from outside. "Beginning entry procedures. Stand clear of the main door." The blast doors. Locking mechanisms disengaged with a series of heavy clanks that made everyone in the shelter jump. Emergency lighting flickered as the massive portal began to swing open, revealing figures in powered armor that looked like mechanical nightmares to the terrified colonists. Sergeant Rodriguez stepped through the doorway, her plasma rifle held, in a ready position as her squad spread out behind her. Her armor was scarred from recent combat, with scoring marks where swarm energy weapons had failed to penetrate her defensive systems. To the colonists, she looked like death incarnate. "This is Sergeant Rodriguez, Terran 3rd Marine Division," she announced, her voice amplified by her armor speakers. "We're here to get you out. Is anyone injured?" Dr. Yanai stared at the human Marine with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. She had heard stories about human military units, but seeing them in person was different. They moved with predatory grace, their weapon systems tracking potential threats even in the supposedly safe shelter. "We have wounded," Yanai managed to say, gesturing toward the colony's injured. "Some require immediate medical attention." "Corporal Chun, establish medical triage," Rodriguez ordered. "Kim, Williams, secure the perimeter. I want to know about every tunnel and access point within 100 meters. The Marines went to work with terrifying efficiency, transforming the shelter from a place of hiding into a fortified position in minutes. Medical equipment appeared from their packs as they began treating the wounded colonists with supplies far more advanced than anything the colony had possessed. "How many survivors in this shelter?" Rodriguez asked Dr. Yanai. 347, Yanai replied, still struggling to believe they might actually be rescued. "Any knowledge of other survivor groups?" Shelter 12 had contact. "Until yesterday. Shelter 15 went silent 3 days ago, but they might still be alive." Rodriguez nodded, already coordinating with other Marine units throughout the tunnel complex. Her tactical display showed the locations of all known shelters, and the progress of clearing operations in each sector. "Doctor, we're going to move your people to the surface for evacuation within the next 4 hours, she said. "My unit will provide escort while other teams continue elimination operations." The evacuation began with military precision that amazed the colonists. Human Marines moved through the tunnels in coordinated formations, clearing routes and establishing security checkpoints at regular intervals. The survivors were grouped into manageable units and escorted through passages that had been death traps just hours before. Colonel Harris coordinated the overall evacuation from his command post on the surface, watching tactical displays that showed Marine units throughout the underground complex. The swarm had established strong points in the deeper industrial sections, turning mining equipment into improvised weapons and using the colony's own infrastructure against its inhabitants. "Status report," he requested from his company commanders. "Alpha Company has secured shelters 1 through 8, reported Captain Morrison. 234 survivors evacuated, 43 wounded but stable. Bravo Company has eliminated swarm resistance in sectors 4 through 7, added Captain Lopez. 196 survivors extracted, minimal casualties. Charlie Company is engaging heavy swarm concentration in the processing center, Captain Zhang reported. Enemy units have converted mining equipment into defensive weapons. Request orbital fire support. Harris studied the tactical situation in the processing center, noting the concentration of swarm units that had fortified themselves using the colony's own industrial equipment. The machines had learned to use human-built tools as weapons, turning excavators into assault platforms and smelting furnaces into area denial weapons. "Negative on orbital fire," Harris replied. "Too close to civilian areas. Charlie Company, execute close quarters elimination protocol." What followed was a demonstration of why human Marines were feared throughout the galaxy. Captain Zhang's company advanced into the processing center using tactics that seemed insane to most species. Direct assault against fortified positions. using portable weapons that turned industrial equipment into scrap metal. The swarm units had expected to face cautious enemies who would retreat when faced with superior defensive positions. Instead, they encountered Marines who used explosive charges to collapse tunnels on enemy positions, who turned the colony's own mining equipment against its swarm occupiers, and who fought with a ferocity that overwhelmed mechanical logic. Processing. Center secured, Zhang reported 40 minutes later. All swarm units eliminated. 17 survivors found in hidden shelter beneath the main facility. Harris smiled with satisfaction as the tactical displays showed green status indicators throughout the colony complex. The Veltar swarm had controlled this territory for nearly a week, establishing strong positions and turning it into a mechanical fortress. Human Marines had taken it back in less than 6 hours. All companies begin final sweep operations, Harris ordered. I want every tunnel, every maintenance shaft, and every utility space checked for remaining swarm units. We don't leave until we're certain every machine on this rock is dead. The final phase of the operation was the most dangerous, hunting down individual swarm units that had gone into hiding throughout the colony's extensive tunnel network. These machines had learned to avoid direct confrontation, using hit-and-run tactics and ambush positions to survive the human assault against any other species. This would have been an effective strategy. Against humans, it was merely postponing the inevitable. Marine units moved through the tunnels with sensors that could detect mechanical components through solid rock, following swarm units to their hiding places and eliminating them with methodical precision. Dr. Yunai stood on the colony's surface for the first time in a week, breathing recycled air from a temporary atmospheric shelter while she watched human Marines load wounded colonists onto medical transports. The landscape around her had been transformed into a graveyard of destroyed machines, but the humans moved through it with casual confidence. Doctor, we've accounted for all survivors from the registered population, Sergeant Rodriguez informed her. Final count is 4,208 rescued, with injuries ranging from minor to critical but treatable. Yanai stared at the human Marine, trying to process the numbers. When the attack began, the colony had held 50,000 inhabitants. The fact that over 4,000 had survived a week-long swarm infestation was beyond anything she had dared hope for. The others? She asked quietly. Rodriguez's expression didn't change behind her helmet visor, but her voice carried a weight that spoke of experience with such losses. The swarm processed approximately 45,000 colonists before we arrived. I'm sorry. The numbers hit Yanai like physical blows, but she forced herself to focus on the survivors around her. 4,000 people were alive because humans had decided to help them. It wasn't enough to heal the wound, but it was something to build on. Around them, the work of elimination continued. The final sweep of Kepler Colony 7 took 36 hours to complete, and when it was finished, not a single Veltar unit remained functional anywhere on the planet. Admiral Chun stood in the colony's former command center, now serving as a temporary coordination facility for the evacuation operations, reviewing the after-action reports from her Marine commanders. Final elimination count? She asked Colonel Harris. Approximately 50,000 individual swarm units destroyed, Harris reported. Processing facilities completely eliminated, along with all manufacturing capabilities. We also destroyed what appeared to be a prototype long-range transmission array that the swarm was constructing. Chun nodded with satisfaction. The transmission array was particularly concerning. If the Veltar had managed to contact other swarm clusters, the colony's fall could have triggered a galaxy-wide infestation. Human intelligence had learned from the machine wars that the key to stopping the swarm was complete elimination, leaving no units capable of rebuilding or calling for reinforcements. Casualties? 0 human casualties, Admiral. Some minor equipment. Damage from swarm energy weapons, but no injuries requiring medical evacuation. The absence of human casualties was remarkable given the scope of the operation, but it reflected the overwhelming technological and tactical advantages the Third Fleet had brought to bear. The Veltar were designed to fight organic species using Standard Council military doctrine, careful, measured responses with limited objectives and conservative rules of engagement. Humans fought wars with the goal of complete victory, achieved through overwhelming force. The swarm had never encountered an enemy willing to deploy 300 ships and 100,000 Marines to save a single colony, and their tactical algorithms had no response to such aggressive commitment. Dr. Yanai approached the command center with a datapad containing the final survivor roster, her forearms moving with exhausted precision as she completed the last of her medical reports. The past week had been the worst experience of her long career, but the efficiency of the human evacuation had impressed her despite her grief. Admiral, the final survivor count is 4,231 individuals representing 17 different species, she reported. Medical transports are ready to depart for Council hospital facilities. Doctor, where would you like us to take your people? Chun asked. Yanai paused, realizing she hadn't considered the question. The colony was gone, destroyed by the swarm and then sterilized by human military action. The survivors had no homes to return to, and many had lost entire families in the attack. I don't know, she admitted. The colony consortium was our sponsor, but they may not exist anymore. Most of us came here from different homeworlds, and some species don't have established refugee protocols. Chun studied the medical officer with the same analytical attention she applied to tactical problems. The human military was supremely effective at destroying enemies and winning wars, but the aftermath often presented challenges that couldn't be solved with firepower. We'll establish temporary facilities on Kepler Station until the Council can arrange permanent resettlement, Chun decided. The Third Fleet will provide security and support until civilian authorities can take over. The evacuation proceeded with mechanical efficiency as human transports ferried survivors to the orbital station that had serviced the colony's mining operations. The station's facilities were expanded using modular habitats from the fleets support vessels, creating temporary homes for people who had lost everything. As the evacuation concluded, reconnaissance probes detected the approach of Council vessels from the inner systems. The diplomatic contingent that arrived was led by Commander Veltara from Harmony's Watch, accompanied by representatives from several major Council species who had come to assess the situation. Commander Veltara's shuttle docked with the Indomitable 12 hours after the last survivor transport had departed the colony surface. She had prepared herself mentally for what she might find. Stories of human military operations often included disturbing details about collateral damage and excessive force. What she found instead was Admiral Chun standing in a briefing room filled with detailed after-action reports and tactical analyses, her staff working with quiet efficiency to document every aspect of the operation. The human admiral looked tired but satisfied, like someone who had completed a difficult but necessary task. Commander Veltara, Chun said, rising to greet her visitor. I assume you're here for the operational debrief. Admiral, I came to assess the situation and determine what assistance the Council might provide. Veltara replied, though she was already revising her assumptions about what she might find. The situation is resolved, Chun said simply. Veltar swarm eliminated, survivors evacuated and receiving medical care, colony infrastructure secured against future threats. We're prepared to transfer responsibility to Council authorities whenever. You're ready? Veltara studied the tactical displays that showed the colony's current status. The surface was covered with the remains of destroyed swarm units, but the underground facilities remained intact. Temporary structures had been established to support continued operations, and human Marines maintained security positions throughout the complex. Casualties? She asked, dreading the answer. 4,231 survivors out of an original population of 50,000, Chung replied. The swarm had been processing colonists for 6 days before we arrived. We estimate. We saved everyone who was still alive when we made planet fall. The numbers were both horrifying and miraculous. Veltara had expected to find perhaps a few hundred survivors, if any. The fact that over 4,000 people had lived through a week-long swarm infestation spoke to both the effectiveness of the colony's emergency shelters and the speed of the human response. No human casualties? None, some equipment damage, but no injuries. Veltara found this difficult to believe. Council military doctrine assumed that any engagement with the Veltar would result in significant casualties, even for well-equipped professional forces. The idea that humans had eliminated an entire swarm infestation without losing a single person seemed impossible. May I see the operational data? Chun activated the briefing room's holographic display, showing a complete tactical overview of the operation from arrival to completion. Veltara watched in fascination as the human assault unfolded, noting the coordination between orbital fire support and ground forces, the systematic elimination of swarm positions, and the careful protection of civilian areas during combat operations. Your forces deployed directly into occupied territory without reconnaissance or negotiation, Veltara observed. Reconnaissance confirmed hostile occupation and civilian casualties, Chun replied. Negotiation with a machine intelligence focused on organic processing seemed counterproductive. The tactical replay showed human marines advancing through territory that should have been impossible to assault successfully. The swarm had established overlapping fields of fire, defensive positions using industrial equipment, and had the advantage of knowing the terrain better than their attackers. None of it had mattered. Human forces had advanced with tactics that turned every swarm advantage into a weakness, using superior firepower and coordination to overwhelm defenses that should have been impregnable. This level of military response, Veltara said carefully, seems excessive for a colony evacuation mission. Chun looked at her with an expression that was both patient and slightly dangerous. Commander, we didn't come here to evacuate a colony. We came here to eliminate a threat to galactic security and save every person we could in the process. The Veltar swarm could have consumed this entire sector if left unchecked. Other species would have approached this differently. Other species would have arrived 3 weeks later to find a lifeless rock and a swarm fleet heading toward their homeworlds, Chun replied. We've read the reports from the machine wars. The Council's response doctrine gave the swarm time to establish themselves and spread. We don't give our enemies time to adapt. Veltara studied the aftermath displays, noting the complete destruction of every swarm unit and facility on the planet. Human thoroughness was legendary, but seeing it in practice was different from reading reports. They had turned a swarm infestation into a sterile monument to military efficiency. What happens now? She asked. Now you take custody of the survivors and decide how to resettle them, Chun said. The Third Fleet returns to patrol duties, and hopefully the Veltar stay extinct for another 50 years. And if they don't? Chun's smile was the same expression that had terrified Council observers for decades, not cruel, but absolutely confident in human military capabilities. Then we'll do this again, as many times as necessary. The Council delegation departed the next day, taking with them detailed reports about human military doctrine and capabilities that would be studied in Council academies for generations. The survivors of Kepler Colony 7 were resettled on 17 different worlds according to their species and preferences, carrying with them stories of the day humans came to save them. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable as the Third Fleet departed the Kepler system, watching the colony world shrink to a point of light in the rear displays. The mission was complete, the threat eliminated, and innocent lives had been preserved. In the depths of space, other swarm clusters received no signals from Kepler Colony 7. The infection had been cut out before it could spread, cauterized by human firepower and eliminated with surgical precision. The galaxy remained safe because humans had answered a call for help with overwhelming force and absolute commitment. Commander Veltara's report to the Galactic Council would change how many species viewed humanity. They weren't savage warmongers driven by bloodlust and aggression. They were protectors willing to deploy devastating military power in defense of innocent lives. They were the galaxy's immune system, capable of responding to existential threats with force that other species couldn't imagine. The Third Fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel and disappeared into the void, leaving behind a grateful colony of survivors and the scattered remains of humanity's enemies. In council chambers across the galaxy, representatives would debate the implications of what they had witnessed. But in the underground shelters of a dozen other worlds, colonists and miners and traders would sleep a little easier, knowing that if the darkness ever came for them, humans would answer their call for help with everything they had.